In the quiet town of Willow Creek, the last golden leaves of autumn danced in the crisp October breeze. The year was 2015, and the air had the sweet scent of pumpkin spice and the distant echo of laughter. It was Halloween night, and the streets were pockets of shadows and flickering light, as children of all ages roamed in a masquerade of joyful terror. Ethan, a lanky 14-year-old with a mop of unruly hair and a heart full of hope, stepped out of his house dressed as a pirate. His costume was a patchwork of thrift store finds and a plastic sword that clanked against his shin with every step. His mother called out from the doorway, her voice a warm melody that was quickly swallowed by the night. "Remember, Ethan, don't go too far." Ethan's usual band of brothers, Mike and Jake, had deserted him for the more alluring company of their girlfriends. They had promised a night of epic trick-or-treating adventures, but as the moon climbed higher, it became clear they had other plans. So he walked alone, his plastic pumpkin bucket swinging by his side, feeling both the thrill of the evening and the sting of abandonment. As he turned the corner, he spotted a solitary figure leaning against a lamp post, a cloud of smoke curling around his head like a halo. It was Deshawn, his friend from school, who lived a few streets over in the part of town where the lawns weren't quite as manicured. Deshawn's costume was more authentic than any store-bought ensemble. He was dressed in baggy jeans, a oversized hoodie, and a bandana that partially obscured his face. He waved a gloved hand in the air, beckoning Ethan over with a grin that gleamed in the dim light. "What's up, E-Dog?" he called out, the name a recent invention that Ethan hadn't quite warmed up to. "You ready to get this candy haul?" Ethan's eyes lit up at the prospect of companionship. He jogged over to Deshawn, his costume jingling with every step. "Yeah, I'm ready," he exclaimed, the excitement in his voice betraying his earlier disappointment. Deshawn's grin grew wider, and he clapped Ethan on the back. "Good, 'cause I got a whole crew waiting for us. They're gonna show us how the big dogs do Halloween." The crew was a motley assortment of older teens, their faces twisted into menacing grins, their costumes more of an afterthought than an effort. They reeked of weed and testosterone, their voices a cacophony of cackles and taunts as they lounged against the side of a dilapidated house. They greeted Deshawn with a chorus of "What's up, D?" and barely spared Ethan a glance, their eyes raking over his pirate costume with a mix of amusement and contempt. One of them, a burly kid with a bald head and a fake scar painted onto his cheek, sneered. "Looks like we got ourselves a faggot pirate," he jeered, and the others erupted into laughter. Ethan felt his cheeks burn, but Deshawn stepped in, flashing a grin that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Come on, let's not scare off the new blood before he's had a taste of the fun." He turned to Ethan, lowering his voice. "Don't worry about them, E-Dog. They're just messing with you 'cause you're fresh meat." Ethan swallowed hard, trying to ignore the knot in his stomach. The night grew darker, and the air grew colder, but the adrenaline coursing through Ethan's veins kept him warm. Deshawn led him from house to house, and with every door that opened, the group grew bolder. They didn't just ask for candy, they demanded it, their language peppered with curses and threats that made even the bravest homeowners quiver. The bald kid, who went by the name Scary Larry, produced a BB gun that looked eerily like a real AR-15, and the sight of it was enough to make the adults hand over the goods without protest. Ethan watched in horror and fascination as the night descended into a whirlwind of chaos. They didn't just take candy, they smashed pumpkins, egged cars, and toilet-papered trees. Each act of vandalism brought a fresh wave of exhilaration and fear. He was torn between the thrill of being part of something bigger than himself and the sinking feeling that he was in over his head. Deshawn caught his eye, his expression a silent challenge, and Ethan knew he had to keep up or risk being left behind. The tension grew thicker with every step, the shadows dancing menacingly around them. The group grew more daring, their laughter turning into snarls as they sought new targets for their mischief. And in the midst of it all, Ethan clutched his plastic pumpkin, now heavy with the spoils of their conquests, feeling the weight of his choices dragging him down. He had crossed a line, and there was no going back. The sweetness of the night had turned sour, and the candy in his bucket tasted like ashes in his mouth. As the witching hour approached, the gang grew restless, their eyes glinting with a hunger that wasn't satisfied by sugar alone. Deshaun leaned in close to Ethan, his breath hot against his ear. "You ready for the main event?" he whispered, a sinister glint in his eye. Ethan nodded, his heart racing, unsure of what was to come but unable to resist the allure of the darkness that had embraced him. The group moved as one, their footsteps echoing down the deserted streets like the approaching footfall of a monster in a nightmare. Scary Larry broke into a run, the BB gun held tight in his grip, and the others followed suit. They were hunting now, the prey clear in their sights, a group of younger kids, no more than 10 years old, their eyes wide with terror as they saw the older teens bearing down on them. The smaller children dropped their buckets and scattered, their candy spilling like a rainbow of hope into the night. Ethan's legs moved of their own accord, propelled by the energy of the pack, his conscience screaming for him to stop, but the thrill was too great. The chase was on, and the night grew wilder. The air was filled with the sound of running feet and the harsh laughter of the predators. Ethan's pirate hat fell off, forgotten in the rush of adrenaline. The group of terrified children disappeared into the maze of houses, but the older teens had other plans. Scary Larry skidded to a halt, his boots scraping against the pavement. "Hold up, let's take a breather," he said, his voice a low rumble. He pulled out a thick, green blunt and lit it with a flourish, the tip burning a fiery orange. The sweet, pungent smell of marijuana filled the air, mingling with the scent of burning leaves and the distant throb of bass from a Halloween party. Deshaun slapped the blunt into Ethan's hand, his eyes glinting with mischief. "Take a hit, E-dog. It'll help you keep up with the big boys." The pressure was palpable, and Ethan, not wanting to disappoint, took a tentative puff. The smoke filled his lungs, and as he coughed it out, the world around him seemed to spin and tilt. The sound of Fetty Wap, My Way floated on the breeze, a macabre soundtrack to their twisted festivities. The music grew louder as they approached the source, a house with the lights blazing and the bass rattling the windows. The beat pounded in Ethan's chest, each pulse syncing with his racing heart. As the smoke swirled around them, Ethan's paranoia grew. The shadows seemed to twist and leer, the laughter of the other kids transforming into the cackles of demons. The candy in his bucket felt like rocks, weighing him down with each step. He took another hit, hoping it would ease his nerves, but instead, it sent his anxiety spiraling. The world grew hazy, and he stumbled, almost dropping the plastic pumpkin. The taste of the weed was bitter on his tongue, and he wondered if he had made a terrible mistake. The group gathered around him, their costumes blurring into a sea of darkness. They laughed and jeered, passing the blunt around like a grim communion. The music grew louder, and Ethan felt like he was being swallowed by the night. The house ahead looked like a beacon of malevolence, the lights flickering in time with the bass, casting eerie patterns on the ground. His heart hammered in his chest, and he realized he didn't know where they were anymore. The streets of Willow Creek had become a labyrinth of fear, and he was lost in it with monsters as his guides. The party inside the house was in full swing, the throbbing beat of the music spilling out into the street. The door was open, and Ethan could see the silhouettes of bodies dancing in a frenetic blur. Deshaun grabbed his arm, his grip like a vice. "Come on, we're gonna crash this shindig," he shouted over the din, his words slurred and menacing. Ethan's stomach churned, but he followed, the paranoia from the weed turning his insides to ice. He knew he should be scared, but the thrill of the chase still had him in its grip. As they stepped into the house, the music washed over them like a wave. The air was thick with the smell of smoke and sweat, the strobe lights painting the room in a stark, pulsing rhythm. Kids in costumes bumped and grinned together, lost in the chaos of the night. Ethan felt a hand on his shoulder and turned to see Scary Larry, the BB gun now slung casually across his back. "You with us, "Little pirate," he sneered. Ethan nodded, his eyes wide with fear and excitement. The group pushed through the partygoers, leaving a trail of uneasy glances in their wake. Suddenly, a parent at the edge of the room spotted the gun and froze. His hand shot out, yanking his child behind him, his eyes wide with terror. He screamed, get down," as Larry strutted by, his legs spread wide, shouting the lyrics to a Chief Keef song. The room stumbled to a halt, the music seeming to fade into the background as the panic grew. Ethan watched, his heart racing, as the parent's face turned from fear to anger. He recognized the man from around town, Mr. Thompson, a burly man with a stern look who didn't take kindly to trouble. "That's not real," Ethan yelled over the music, trying to defuse the situation, but his voice was lost in the cacophony. The room erupted into chaos as parents grabbed their kids and dashed for the door, the music now a frantic backdrop to the horror unfolding. Larry, fueled by the power of his fearsome disguise, reveled in the panic. He raised the BB gun in the air, spitting out the words to the song, the muzzle flashing with the strobe lights. The sight of the gun had the partygoers ducking and screaming, the festive spirit of Halloween shattered by the very real fear of violence. Ethan felt a cold sweat break out on his forehead, his costume suddenly feeling like a prison. He looked to Deshawn for guidance, but his friend's eyes were glazed over with excitement, a twisted grin plastered on his face. The group moved through the house, knocking over decorations and spilling drinks, the music now a distant throb. Ethan felt like he was in a nightmare, his feet moving of their own accord as the horror unfolded around him. They reached the backyard, where a bonfire cast a hellish glow on the terrified faces of those who had fled the party. The BB gun was now pointed at the sky, Larry's laughter echoing through the night like the howl of a madman. Ethan's mind raced, trying to think of a way to stop this before it went too far. He knew he couldn't just run, he had to do something. As the group gathered around the bonfire, he saw his chance. He darted forward, his hand reaching for Larry's gun, but before he could grab it, the world exploded in a burst of light and sound. Someone from the shadows had opened fire with the real gun, and the partygoers' screams of fright turned to cries of terror. The BB gun was nothing compared to the roar that now filled the night, sending the party into a frenzy of panic. Ethan felt his heart drop into his stomach as he realized what was happening. He wished with all his might that Mike and Jake were here, that he had never left the safety of their friendship for this hellish night. The ground was wet with spilled drinks and the tears of terrified children. The smell of gunpowder mingled with the sickly sweet scent of burning plastic. Ethan's pirate costume felt like a joke now, a sad reminder of the innocent fun he had once thought this night would hold. He stumbled, his legs threatening to give out beneath him, and he dropped to his knees, the plastic sword clattering uselessly beside him. He was too scared to move, too scared to think. Around him, the chaos grew. People were falling, their costumes stained with crimson. The gunfire was relentless, the sound echoing through the night like a symphony of death. Ethan's eyes searched the crowd for any sign of Deshawn or the others, but all he saw were strangers dressed as monsters, their faces twisted with fear and anger. He had made a terrible mistake, and now he was paying the price. He curled into a ball, his candy-filled pumpkin shielding his head, and he wept. The warmth of his tears mingled with the cold October air, creating a salty mask on his cheeks. He hated himself for being here, for letting Deshawn and the others pull him into this nightmare. He missed the simplicity of his old life, the safety of his childhood, the warmth of his mother's voice calling him home. The gunfire stopped as abruptly as it had started, leaving only the cries of the injured and the frantic whispers of those hiding. Ethan didn't dare move, his breath coming in ragged.